Hi everyone, my name is Nuno from Sound Particles, and today we're going to talk about sequencers and arpeggiators. So two different ways of creating arpeggios with your synth, and something that a lot of presets has this ability to create the arpeggiators and create things like this. You play a note and you start having all of these notes jumping around, which could be quite interesting. So once again, we are using here SkyDust, and there is two ways of creating arpeggios with synthesizers. Of course, there is a manual way, you play notes around, but using synthesizers, there are two ways. One of them is using an arpeggiator or using a sequencer. Well, what is the difference? Well, when you're using arpeggiator, something like this over here, pretty much you select a pattern. You say, okay, I want to have moving up and down, or moving up, and you play a chord or a bunch of notes. And pretty much you have this pattern, and the pattern say, okay, let's start with the lowest and then go jumping up and then back, or it could be, let's go down, or eventually moving up and down. Okay, so pretty much you play multiple notes, there is a pattern that you select, and then based on that pattern, what happens is that you're going having these arpeggios. And it's important to understand the importance of sequencers and arpeggiators, because originally when synthesizers were created, synthesizers were monophonic, which means that they would only be able to play one note at a time. So what happened was that creating these arpeggios was a way for you to use a monophonic synthesizer that can only play one note at a time, but to create harmonies out of it. Because, okay, yes, it's one note at a time, but if you jump between notes in a fast way, then you can actually start creating almost like this harmonic content to make your music richer. So arpeggiator, like I mentioned, you play a series of notes. There is a pattern, okay? Of course, usually that's a way to speed up or speed down the sequence. And usually, both with arpeggiator or the sequencers, there are two ways of controlling this speed. Sometimes you want something manually and simply say, no, I want to play. And you say how many beeps or how many jumps per minute you want, okay? Sometimes what you want to do is to place this in sync with your song, making sure that you are using the tempo that you define on the workstation, on your project, and use that to control this, which means that, for instance, you've created some arpeggios here, then you say, okay, but the music is too slow, let's slightly change the tempo of your project, and then you want this to adapt to that tone. So usually there is a button called sync or host or something like that, that pretty much when activated, the knob that usually it's a regular beats per minute, or the duration of each jump in 1 second, half a second, those kinds of things. If you select this, then what is going to happen is, okay, I want this jump to happen on every 16th note, or for instance 18th note, or a quarter note, or whatever. So pretty much you say, okay, this is too slow or too fast, and then if I go to the tempo of my host and change the tempo, this will react to it. Okay, also regarding still arpeggiators, before going to sequences, that is a much more powerful thing, you select the pattern, you select the speed. Also sometimes allows you to add additional octaves depth. What this means is that, okay, I'm playing this, but now imagine that I say, okay, besides the notes that I'm playing, actually let's add some additional, the same notes, but for instance also 1 octave below and 1 octave above, which means that now I'm going to have something like this. I'm still playing only these 3 notes, so pretty much what it's going to do is I'm playing, for instance, a note, and it considers that note 1 octave below, and that note 1 octave above, and that's interesting ways of creating arpeggios. Nonetheless, the problem with arpeggiators is that, yes, it's easier, you simply press your notes and you get sounds coming out of it. The problem is that it doesn't allow you to create this custom kind of arpeggios that you may want, and that's why most of the times people prefer to use the sequencer, because it's much more powerful. When we have a sequencer, what happens is that we have something like here, and this is going to be the sequence of notes that you want to play. So I'm going to play a note, okay, and it starts playing that note here in sequence. Now, if I want to make changes on and each note to be slightly different, I can come here and slightly get different positions and get, okay. Okay, so how does it well? Well, imagine the following. In here, the idea is not to play a bunch of notes, is you play one note and then that note will be the reference of this. So imagine that you want a C major kind of chord. So I'm playing a C, okay? So what happened? Okay, I have a C, the first note I want to be a C. I want the second note to sound like a E, so pretty much it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones above. So let's come here and say, okay, I want the second note to be 4 semitones above. Then I want the third note to be a G, so it's like, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's put this at +7. And then the other 1 octave above, and the octave is 12 semitones. So you get this. Okay, so pretty much what you are doing is giving what is the offset of notes that you want to listen to. For instance, if I play a C, I get this. If I play a F, if I play a G, so, and then you are creating this sequence of notes. Also, most sequencers allow you to define the number of steps. Imagine that you want a basic, very basic kind of things. It could be only something like this. Okay, or you can create, now let's put much more complicated arpeggios that change a lot during time, so you can create more things over there. Also, one thing that you notice is that usually these steps has a button above where you can go there and say, okay, I want to enable this or disable a step. So imagine that you say, no, I don't want these two steps being used, so as you can see here, the step 3 and 4 are not doing anything. You are only listening to the releases of the previous notes. Okay, so you can enable and disable some of the steps. It doesn't mean that every single step needs to be used. Eventually, you may want to use almost something like a rest in that step to not play a note, but actually having the ausence, not having a note there. Okay. Also, depending on the sequencer, most of the times you are able to control the range. So in here we have -1 octave to +1 octave. Imagine that you come here and say, I want a different range because I want a much more crazy kind of sound. So with this, we can actually, in this case, make the change, and this is going to be 2 octaves above, and this is going to be 2 octaves below and 2 octaves above. So a lot of things that we can do here with the sequencer. Of course, yes, we still have the speed here that could be in sync with the tempo of the host or completely independent. What else can you do? Well, sometimes you are controlling something over here, okay? But now imagine that you want to control not only the pitch, but also making sure that each note has a slightly different timbre, okay? And you also want to almost like automate the timbre of the note. Well, most of these sequencers also allow you to add additional parameters to the sequence besides the pitch. So imagine that you come here and say, okay, let's control the frequency of all filters, okay? So now this is completely closed. Let's open up this filter to make sure that you get this fully open filters over here. So now we're going to have a much more bright kind of sound. Okay, and now imagine that you say, okay, I want this, but I want over here this note to be much more mellow with less bright kind of sound, and you get this. Okay, as you can see, sometimes these notes are not being played because in here I'm using an LFO that is removing a lot of the cutting a lot of the sound there, but or eventually imagine they want to do something over here slightly different. Okay, so you can automate not only the pitch, but also add additional parameters, the frequency, the cutoff frequency of the filters, or the resonance of the filters, or the gains, or some other things that you may eventually want over here to change. Regarding all of this, the sequencer gives you a lot of possibilities, a lot of arpeggios, a lot of fantastic things for you to do. In the case of SkyDust, we decided to put also here this as a keyboard, because for me the problem with the pitch part that most sequencers have is that sometimes it's difficult for you to say, okay, I want to jump to that note, and then you start, okay, that note is how many semitones? Oh, it's six semitones. And you start coming out of your creativity just to think about how many semitones are there. Sometimes you look at things, this is not very intuitive what is happening, so that's why we created this keyboard there to show this. And if you're using a keyboard, why not using sometimes polyphonic sequences? That could be also quite interesting to create, and you start having this. So you can create additional polyphonic sequences that, yes, historically it were monophonic most of the times, but why not use polyphonic? Nonetheless, most synthesizers, what they have is this pitch bar with this thing over there. So I really recommend you to play with these sequencers and arpeggiators, feeling when do you want one of them, when we want something of the other, because by doing that you start using this more and more often, and some presets you really want a sequencer to create this fantastic sound for you. So I hope you have enjoyed, and let's see you on the next session that I'm going to talk about using envelope generators but to control pitch. So stay tuned, see you around.